The curtain had been drawn on the true vulnerability of just regular people who in daily life seemed to have it all together, yet behind the scenes are just as desperate, lonely, and scared as the rest of us. Okay, hello again. Time Not Here by me, David Caldecott. We are now up to part 3, Hoka Hay. Chapter 15. Daniel sat on a foam floor cushion, one of many strewn around the living room of Joseph and Magda's home. A grey cat roamed. The smell of incense filled his nostrils, each inhalation soothing his rampant nerves. Across from him sat Celeste, with her long blonde hair and hypnotic blue eyes. She was introducing herself to the group, then stood to greet Magda, who had just walked in. They embraced. To his right, a bald, middle-aged German man stood rigid. He wore ordinary glasses and the unremarkable outfit of a t-shirt and jeans. He seemed wary and awkward. Next to him sat a thin, spindly-looking man in black khakis and a hoodie, emblazoned with vicious, howling wolves. In his mid-30s, he looked like a teenage grunge fan supplanted into a man's body. On his left was the man who'd sat in the passenger seat during the car journey. He was a blonde, green-eyed Dutchman who told Daniel that he had taken ayahuasca the previous year, and whose eyes had that same strange glow that Daniel had seen before. Another woman walked in nervously and sat down where Celeste had been. She smiled at Daniel. They were nothing like he thought they'd be. He had expected hippies or drug-addled junkies. This group just seemed like normal people. More men than he had expected, perhaps. He worried he'd be the only one. But with Celeste's late arrival, the final headcount was 8 men to just 2 women. He didn't know if that was a good sign or not. The man who'd sat next to him in the back of the car had introduced himself as Dominic. He now sat diagonally from Daniel across the living room, fidgeting and sweating. Daniel watched him shuffle in his seat, smiling unconvincingly whenever eye contact was made. There was a sense of familiarity with the insincerity of his movements. He reminded him almost of Lathe. As he wondered what that meant, Joseph announced to the group that it was time to go for a walk. They walked around the farmlands nearby the house, and Daniel started some conversations. He was too timid to share much about why he was there, and certainly didn't want to share anything about Lathe with them. They are here for their own reasons, he thought. No reason to trouble them with how fucked up my last year has been. As he walked, he learned that Celeste had taken Kimber twice before. Each time she had waded through oceans of self-development. Her first ceremony was to heal from her abusive relationship with her mother. Her second was to gain clarity on her fashion career. This time she wanted help navigating a new romantic relationship. The spindly wolfman was called Matthew and worked as an IT consultant. Married with kids and in the midst of an early midlife crisis, he was here for clarity of purpose. They spoke about physics for a while, and Daniel shared some of his ideas about a simulated universe being the root of some supernatural phenomena. Matthew smiled, agreed, then told Daniel how many hours he had wasted on YouTube too, trying to figure it all out. Daniel frowned. Throughout the walk, Daniel rarely looked up from his feet. He couldn't believe where he was and what he was about to do. So many months spent pining for the day he'd finally get some answers. Now here it was, and it did not seem real. When they returned to the house, Magda asked everyone to sit for an introduction to Kimber and for the start of the ceremony. A quiet panpipe melody played in the background as the group settled down. Kimber has been used for centuries by the people of Kimbala and is a very powerful tool for personal development, spiritual growth, and understanding who we are and what we are doing here. Magda started telling the group about the Kimber plant itself, then placed a young specimen on the table, no more than 2 feet tall, with a slim stem and large green leaves. She explained how the bark was extracted and ground down to a fine powder. The Kimbala tribe use the medicine to this day for all kinds of elaborate ceremonies. Their focus is usually initiation, which is why I call you initiates in my welcome email. Interestingly, it was most used by adolescent boys who were ready to be confirmed as men. Celeste hadn't mentioned that part when she'd told Daniel about Kimber. Did she know? Magda continued, Kimber will teach you what you need to learn. You may think that you want to do this or that during the ceremony, But you should not be disappointed if something else happens. The spirit of Kimber is very wise, and it works in different ways for different people in different stages of life. For us, Joseph added, each journey is different. Some are visual, some are not, some make us vomit, some do not. The most important thing is that you go where Kimber wants you to go. Don't fight it. Sorry again about the accents. I'm not an actor. They opened the floor to the group and asked each initiate to share who they were and why they were there, moving counterclockwise from Celeste, who sat to his left. Daniel shifted in his seat and winced at the idea of speaking to the whole group. When he realized he'd be the last one to share and could hear everyone else's first, it calmed his anxiety just a little bit. Celeste started to share. The group heard about her experiences with Kimber and how healing she'd found the plant to be. She explained how she'd recently fallen in love and was terrified of how quickly it was moving. I'm hoping that Kimber will show me what I need to do next. The third speaker, Anna, was slightly overweight and looked very tired. She shared how she had been abused by her uncle and lived most of her life bouncing between different abusive narcissists. She had believed them to be good boyfriends, but paid the price when each began the devalue and destroy stages of an abusive relationship. I want freedom from this self-destruction and to fall in love with a good man for once in my life. Daniel was moved by her story and wondered how much he had been self-destructing when he had accepted Laith into his life. Some wanted career clarity, like Matthew. Some were there for relationship problems, like Adam, who was trying to decide if he should get back together with his ex-wife after she cheated on him for the sake of their infant son. It was a snapshot into the hidden turmoil of everyday people. Things you don't usually hear from shy people like Anna or quiet IT nerds like Matthew. The curtain had been drawn on the true vulnerability of just regular people who in daily life seem to have it all together, yet behind the scenes are just as desperate, lonely, and scared as the rest of us. Dominic started his turn. He was sweating like an ape. He told the group that he'd first taken Kimber 2 years ago as an opioid addict close to suicide. That ceremony had wiped his state clean, and he'd been traveling the world with joy ever since. He was back now to learn more about himself and get a booster. When Hans, the bold German, had his turn, he shared that he had a severe psychological handicap, or rather used to have one, up until about a year ago when he had first taken Kimber, in this very house. During his ceremony, he had experienced an ego death. I spent my whole life, studying my condition and learning all the names and symptoms I was diagnosed with. I knew so much about it, but had no understanding of it. My Kimber journey last year showed me that I was something bigger than my ego, something that didn't have a diagnosis, something that understood who other people were and that they had thoughts too. My ego had prevented me from seeing other people as real. Kimber showed me that they are. So, I've spent a lot of time this year trying to get to know people. I've learned how to step out of my ego, but I feel like there is more work to do, and so that is why I'm here. It came to Daniel's turn. He took a deep breath and told himself to speak freely. I've had a very turbulent few years. In university, I had a big problem with drugs, which ended when I decided to start a business. But the business was exciting and moved really quickly, but I was just so depressed the whole time. Last year, I moved town. I've spent my time since then trying to understand why I've been so incompetent all my life, why I struggle with addiction, and why I keep making bad decisions. Most of all, I feel like I've been a coward, and I don't want to be like that anymore. He took a moment to look around the room. Nothing but compassionate faces, sadness for his pain. I want understanding of who I am, what has happened to me and how to move past it to start living a better life, free from guilt and fear, where I can confront situations with courage instead of cowering like a child. I guess that's what I'm hoping that Kimber will do for me. A series of heartfelt smiles met him. These people had nothing but love for him. No judgment, no criticism, just understanding and warmth. In that moment, he realized that for other people, all his problems were just another story, someone else's drama. The second that they turned away and looked at someone else, something else, his problems disappeared from their mind, no longer worth worrying about. Altogether different when dealing with your own story, he pondered. Thank you all for sharing, Magda concluded the session as she stood with her arms held out towards the group. Now we will take some cards. Cards, they soon found out, meant some sort of tarot cards, the exact opposite of what Daniel wanted right in this moment. The mere mention of cards triggered a cascade of doubt about whether this was all woo-woo and placebo, just a few hippies who want to stick it to Western medicine. It could be pseudo-scientific bullshit that makes a few con artists a lot of money, but doesn't actually do anything for the people handing over their dough. Great. Well, I'm here, right? I've handed over the money. I'm here, in this house. My flight is in 3 days, and I have nowhere better to be. So, on the off chance that this African plant does actually work, what do I have left to lose? Dominic took his card first and read it out to the group. I consciously choose to forgive, to let go of the anger and guilt. The only forgiveness I need, I have, and it is given to me by my Divine Mother. He looked confused as he read it, as if he had hoped for something else. Daniel was disappointed too. He had hoped his card would be about forgiveness, self-forgiveness to be precise. As more of the group read their cards, the idea that it was woo-woo quickly evaporated. He couldn't explain it, but the cards aligned remarkably well with each person's need. Anna's card was about choosing to value herself more, in the process avoiding the kind of people that make her feel worthless. Adam's was about letting go of attachment, emphasizing that when trust is broken, it's sometimes better to just let go than cling on and be hurt again. Matthew's card was about saying yes to more, opening life up to excitement and joy through adventurous new experiences. Some were more general, like it could be applied to anyone, like Celeste, which was about choosing to live freely, unbound by association to the past. No mention of the romance struggle she had had. Some of them were a lot more direct and quite intense for Daniel to hear. Hans's card said, I consciously choose to open my heart to others. By letting go of my identity and embracing others as I have myself, I find the love that I am looking for. Daniel turned his card over when his turn came, eager to see if it held the same personal significance that everyone else's seemed to have for them. He read it out. I consciously choose to live in the here and now. Immediately, his mind took hold. That's not about forgiveness. That's not about courage, choosing better friends, or getting over addictions. Here and now? What the hell does that have to do with anything? He continued, I will no longer spend my days focused on the past or future. Now is a new moment. No matter what has happened or what I think will happen, I deserve to be still, calm, and peaceful in every moment. By the time he reached that last line, he was crying. He had spent so much of his life hating himself, feeling crippling guilt and shame for the decisions he had made. This card spoke to the deep longing he had tried so hard to ignore, to just be still, calm, and peaceful. Whatever living in the here and now meant, he wanted to find out more now. He said a silent prayer, staring at the kimber plant, stood proudly in its pot in front of him. Teach me. When the card exercise was over, Joseph stood and smiled at each initiate, one by one. His posture was strong and firm, yet beaming love. Now, Joseph started, the ceremony will begin with the offering. They'd been told in their welcome email to bring a personal item that they would place on Magda's kimber shrine before taking their first dose of the medicine. It was a 7-story shelving unit made of old and characterful wood, tree-like in shape, wide at the bottom, narrow at the top. It looked similar to the pyramidal bookshelf Daniel had built that first day back in York. On each shelf stood dozens of small trinkets left by initiates that had come for their own journeys of discoveries over the years. There were feathers, playing cards, small statues and photographs, each hinting at the struggle that the offerer had come to kimber with. Chaotically beautiful in its randomness, a shrine to human suffering and redemption, embodying the vast array of age-old personal development strifes, symbolizing the opportunity to move through it all, letting it go for good. Each initiate presented their offering and placed it on the shelf. Matthew left his business card, Adam a picture of his ex-wife. Hans pulled out a small Lego wizard and stared at it for a few moments. When I was a boy, this Lego piece was my favorite. I gave him magical powers, ability to fly, ability to move things with his mind, ability to understand other people. If I got confused about something my parents said or did, I would pretend that this little wizard understood everything so that I didn't have to. That made me feel safe. I've kept him for 40 years. It's time to let him go. Celeste let out a comforting sigh as he placed it on the shelf. Daniel had brought 2 items for the offering. The first was a Zippo lighter, engraved with the name of his first business. The second was a metal hip flask, also engraved, this time with his name, that had been gifted to him by Lathe. He'd wanted to symbolize letting go of the vices of business, smoking, alcohol, and Lathe all at once. But as he stood watching the others place their offerings on the pyramid, he felt a strong sense that his offerings were somehow wrong. It came to his turn. I was going to offer up these things, but as I'm looking at them, I'm realizing they belong in the trash, not on a shrine. He walked to the waste paper basket in the corner of the room and dropped them in. He turned to the stairs. I have something else in my bag upstairs. I think I'd like to offer that instead. Please, one moment. Coming back down the stairs a number of moments later, he held a football-sized toy monkey that he'd felt compelled to pack, not knowing why until now. The right arm had been torn along its length, exposing foam innards from the armpit to the hand. It used to have a wire running from a battery pack to a button in the monkey's hand. The button triggered the speaker in its belly to sing out jubilant monkey noises. But Daniel had torn out the wires during his teenage years when it malfunctioned and he couldn't fix it. This monkey was given to me by my parents on my 5th birthday, the day that we moved from England to Saudi Arabia. It was a difficult day. I don't remember much, but this toy was really important to me and I loved it. And that was before I had a horrific experience at age 6. Before I had my world ripped out from under me at 10 when we moved back to England. Before I started smoking at 15 to try to finally make some friends. Before I started taking ketamine at 18 to escape the misery I felt at university. In other words, before life became too difficult to manage. When I got this monkey, I was an innocent child before things got messy. I suppose I've been holding on to him because it represents the child inside, and it is time to let go. Time to grow up. A few in the group nodded and sighed in kindness. He walked to the shrine and placed the monkey on the bottom shelf, its torn arm exposed, sat with its legs crossed like the Buddha. Staying in the semicircle formation they'd made around the shrine, Magda took some wooden beads and handed them to Celeste, instructing her to hold them and focus her intention on their healing power. before passing them to the next initiate to do the same. As the beads were passed around to the trance-inducing sound of Kimberlee's tribal music, Magda moved from person to person, placing a small chalk dot on their forehead. She placed the dot on Daniel's brow and whispered, "Safe journey." The first dose of Kimber was presented in small circular dishes, handed to each initiate with a ceremonial bow. Future doses would be in pill form, but this all-important first dose was loose powder. Daniel looked down at the brown dust. He could smell an intense, earthy aroma with a slight vinegar tone. It did not smell good. They were given water bottles and told that they should keep the powder in their mouth as long as they could, letting it seep through the tongue and gums, tasting its flavor and connecting with the plant that would be their guide. Magda gave the word, and the group poured their respective dishes into their mouths. Everybody winced. It tasted worse than it smelt, a strong bitterness that made Daniel feel like he'd just poured battery acid into his mouth. Gritty and dense, the powder spread around his mouth, bringing with it a feeling of numbness that, in ignoring the intense taste, was actually quite relaxing. After a few minutes of moving the powder around his mouth, he couldn't take the taste any longer and swallowed it down with some water. Magda smiled and called out, "Good journeys, everyone." She handed them each a blackout mask to block out all light from entering their eyes, supposedly to help with the hallucinations, before instructing the group to head back to their beds, scattered around the room. Daniel found his allocated bed and sat down, checking that he had everything he'd need. A green plastic bucket was on the floor next to his bed. He made a mental note of where it was, just in case. Already on his bedside table stood a large water flask with a notebook and a pen next to it. Magda and Joseph knew exactly what their initiates might need. He took a deep breath and put the mask on, repeating his silent prayer. Teach me. Thank you for joining me for chapter 15 of my novel, Time Not Here. Peace to you, to your family. I hope that wherever you are, whatever you're up to, that things are going well. You got this. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.